Right. So I'm Paul Willard. I am an engineer, so I'll always be an engineer. And I moved from Boeing to startups in 1999. The first one was called NextCard, the next three, Coupons.com, Practice Fusion, Atlassian. And then in 2013, I switched to the dark side and started my career as an investor. So I'm on my third life, I guess, but have a lot of empathy for the other side of the table because I spent so much time there. 15 years there at 4 different startups. I was asked to talk about how VCs pick startups or how startups attract venture capital, I guess, the other version. And I wanted to start with, a lot of businesses that I see are not really what I would call venture capital businesses. So I want to start with just venture capital versus alternatives like bootstrapping or debt in some cases. Venture capital is very dilutive compared to most other versions of capital that you can get to fund a company. Venture capital will put a lot of pressure on for insanity growth. Even experienced founders have a hard time keeping the wheels on, so to speak. And then a venture capital investor has a fiscal responsibility to their investors, which will drive some of the things that they do, behaviors and decisions, and not necessarily in ways that are always entrepreneur friendly. Famously in the old days, venture capitalists used to fire founders a lot. Doesn't happen as much anymore, but that was because of the fiscal responsibility, not because they didn't like the person. And then a final attribute of venture capital as a means of raising capital is just that you can't really undo it. There's a joke that a VC investor is stickier than a spouse because you can divorce the spouse. But the point just being that once you go, if you change your mind and want to switch to a different approach later because maybe you don't like some of the pressures of the early ones or some aspects that I've been talking about, you probably can't switch back. So then why do VCs if they have these negatives and these challenges, right? Why take VC funding? So for some companies that are going to grow very fast and grow very large, it's really the only good way to get enough capital to keep it going. The rule of thumb is that good outcome venture capital companies will go from 0 to 2 million in their first 12 months. And then they'll triple, double. Only 2 triples. And that gets them to 144 million revenue in 6 years. That's pretty insane. I've been through it, but it's pretty insane. And then on the upside, also, like if you're going to go through that, there are challenges to that group, to that kind of growth, which are personally traumatic, and also from a skill set perspective, traumatic. And a great thing about a good VC investor is you'll have a partner, and you'll have a partner who's been through it before and who's seen it before and knows how to help you. And so trying to survive that kind of growth without that kind of experienced partner, it's probably impossible. You don't see it very often. It's very rare. But at any rate, all venture investors pretty much have these same, we call them the 4 T's. And when we make our decks to get our investors, these 4 T's: team, TAM, tech, and traction. And so I figured I'd just run through them. It's funny, venture capitalists don't really talk about this stuff. It's a little bit frustrating from the operator side, or at least it was for me. And so I'm happy to talk transparently right through it. On the team side, co-founders, 2 or 3 is the best version. One can be pretty tough, and it can be pretty difficult for one person to handle everything that's going to come. More than 3 though, and you start to get difficulty with consensus. Like, is there a vote every time there's a big hairy decision, or is there somebody that can sort of guide through and lead? So leadership can become challenging beyond 3. So 2 to 3 is sort of ideal. 2 historically is the classic version. 1 must be a technical co-founder for the majority of investors in Silicon Valley, for the majority of VCs in Silicon Valley. That technical co-founder needs to be strong, really technically strong, because there's a rule of thumb that you can't hire somebody technically stronger than you. Talent attracts talent is another way that sometimes people say it. And so that technical co-founder being technically strong in the kind of tech that you need for your startup is very, very important. That's why I spent so much time on it right now. Experience, it's funny, a range of experience can work. It's funny, some firms prefer the, I'll say 20 something, the less experienced. It's not the age part. Some folks prefer the less experienced folks because maybe they don't fully appreciate all the challenges that are in front of them, and you need that. Maybe you need that sort of blind ambition in order to get you through the toughest parts. Less experienced folks tend to be more on the consumer side. Experienced folks tend to be more on the enterprise side. And some investors prefer that. And some investors sort of lean toward that. Like if it's a consumer thing, they want a less experienced founder because they have to believe. But if it's an enterprise company, a more experienced founder might be more valuable. So firms are a little bit different on experience, but it does matter. And then the all famous distortion field, I'm sure you've heard that term before. That was the famous Steve Jobs able to convince folks of their will, so to speak. TAM, total addressable market, needs to be big and defensible. There's two ways that it's defensible, either a brand plus integrations. So once you have integrations for your software product with other software products in people's businesses, it's hard to rip out. Or network effect, which creates winner take all models, very attractive for those things. And then a market or a sector that's willing to buy, preferably fast. There are some famously slow purchasing markets, and so those are less attractive to investors. And then market concentration matters. If there's one monster in a market, sometimes they can make it difficult to have good exits, and they can make it difficult to have good buyers. And then catch a market wave. Don't go out and create a new market is the general rule of thumb. That it's too hard to move a market. And then on the tech, the critical questions I believe are: why is this tech ready to go now? Is it hard enough so that it would be difficult for anybody to just copy you quickly while you're early? Would other companies prefer to buy this or rent it? And then finally, the sector of the tech. And so the different types of tech tend to attract different types of funds, as I'll mention in a slide or two. And finally, on the traction, things people are worried about are capital efficiency. So how long did it take you to get to that $2 million of revenue? Because all things being equal, you'd rather fund a team that only needed $1 million in 12 months to get to $2 million run rate versus one that needed $5 million. And then next stages are like product market fit and go to market fit for Series A, Series B. So depending on where you are, the traction bar is moving with you, of course. I think I'm about there. Remember, VCs have investors too. So when we got our funds funded, we sold some sector. For instance, I sell robotics as a service, which is why I have the robots back there behind me. Also, we have a certain fund size, which translates to a check size. So depending on your stage, this comes out typically by stage. So some funds you'll be the right stage for, some you might not. And then finally, many firms, not all, but have some proprietary thing that they're looking for too. Sometimes they publish it, sometimes they don't. You know, Peter Thiel famously is looking for a secret. And Sequoia, for instance, is looking for one of the 7 deadly sins to be assuaged. And so some of the other firms have published theirs, but many haven't, unfortunately. And so my final thing, you know, I always tell people to make a list, go start a Google Sheet, start with competitors. So if there are any competitors nearby in the space, find out who their investors are so you can rule them out. And then dig around on Crunchbase and find similar stage and sector companies and look up who did their investment round. And if you look that up for a number of companies, you will begin to see the same names repeated over and over again. Those are your top targets. Get your referrals, get your introductions, and go to work. So that is a very quick sort of ABCs of venture capital investing for a startup. I hope it was helpful.